For 60 long years, a family had no answers. A killer's secret remained buried. This is the story of Alice Eberhart, and how, 6 decades later, one of America's most notorious serial killers finally confessed to being her murderer.
The story begins in 1965, Trenton, New Jersey. In what seemed like a safe, ordinary neighborhood, a crime was committed that would baffle investigators for generations.
The victim was Alice Eberhart, a young nursing student with her whole life ahead of her. She was found murdered inside her apartment, but the investigation quickly slammed into a brick wall, and her case went cold for nearly 60 years.
So, to really get how this case was finally cracked, we have to go all the way back to the beginning, back to the original crime scene, which was a complete and total puzzle.
Alice was a bright, promising student, which made the whole thing even more tragic. But what really stumped police was the scene itself. There were zero signs of a break-in. In fact, the front door was bolted from the inside. Every single window was shut and locked. The investigation had nowhere to go. No witnesses, no weapon, and, most importantly, no apparent way for a killer to have gotten in or out.
Wait a minute. A room locked from the inside? That immediately makes you think one of two things. Either the scene was staged, or the killer never actually left through a normal exit. The police must have assumed she knew her attacker, that she willingly let him into her home. And that was the leading theory for decades. But the truth was so much more sinister. And it wouldn't even start to come to light until investigators began digging into the past of an entirely different monster, who was active years later. His name was Richard Cottingham. If you follow true crime, you know that name all too well. They called him the Torso Killer or the Times Square Killer. He was a brutal predator who terrorized women across New York and New Jersey in the 70s and 80s. His crimes were known for their savagery, and he was eventually convicted and sentenced to multiple life terms. Now, here is why no one ever made the connection. Cottingham's documented killing spree, the one that made him infamous, happened in the 1970s and 80s. Alice Eberhart's murder in 1965 was viewed as a completely separate tragedy. On paper, their timelines just didn't overlap. He was a known monster, but nobody thought he was a monster back then.
But that just seems like a huge investigative oversight. When you catch a serial killer of this magnitude, shouldn't you look at their entire life? Did the police just accept that his killing spree magically started in the 70s? It feels like a massive blind spot.
And it was a blind spot for a very long time. But cold case detectives are a different breed. They just don't give up. Decades later, with fresh eyes, they decided to go straight to the source himself, an aging Richard Cottingham.
You can see the incredible gap in time on this timeline. The murder's in '65, he's active through the 70s and 80s, and then silence for decades. Until 2024, when detectives started making regular trips to the prison to speak with Cottingham. And after months, he slowly started to talk about what he terrifyingly called his early days.
And then he said it. He admitted he was the one who killed Alice Eberhart. But you can't just take the word of a man like Richard Cottingham. It's not enough. Investigators needed irrefutable proof, details that were never released to the public. Something only the person who was in that room back in 1965 could possibly know. What could that possibly be, though? After 60 years, any physical evidence is long gone or compromised. Memories have faded. You're relying entirely on the memory of a serial killer. What could he say that they could actually verify? He told them how he got into that locked apartment.
And this was the moment everything changed. The proof was chillingly specific. First, he solved the locked room mystery by describing a hidden maintenance access point that wasn't in any public file. Second, he described the apartment's layout with perfect accuracy, matching the original crime scene photographs. And third, he described the murder weapon in detail, a detail that lined up exactly with the sealed forensic reports. This wasn't a guess. He was there.
With that confession, packed with details that only the killer would know, the final heartbreaking chapter of this 60-year story could finally be closed. The Mercer County Prosecutor's Office took every detail Cottingham gave them and laid it against the original, confidential case files from 1965. It was a perfect match. After 6 decades, the case of Alice Eberhart was officially closed. Now for Richard Cottingham, this confession changes absolutely nothing. He's already serving multiple life sentences. He's going to die in prison. There is no additional punishment. But for Alice Eberhart's family, this meant everything.
After living a lifetime with questions and no answers, they finally knew the truth. They finally had a name for the monster.
So just to be perfectly clear on this, he admits to a brutal murder from 60 years ago, and from a legal standpoint, nothing happens? Because he's already locked up for life, this is essentially a free confession. There are no actual consequences for him.
And that's the hard truth about justice that's been delayed this long. It brings answers, but it rarely brings any more punishment. It took a dedicated cold case unit 60 years to pull this one's secret out. And it just makes you wonder, if this was one of his early days, how many other secrets, how many other victims does a killer like this truly take to the grave?